Welcome to Shutter and Flow, a podcast for commercial photographers looking to grow their business, stay creative, and keep up with industry trends. I'm Edward Antonelli, and with me is my co-host, Jeremy Freeman.
That's right, I am.
Today, we're diving into what it's like to work with brands and agencies, how the work differs, how photographers should approach these clients, and what to expect in terms of budgets, creative control, and long-term relationships. Jeremy and I have both worked with brands and agencies at different points in our career. So let's start with the basics. How do you define the key differences between working with a brand directly versus working with a marketing or ad agency?
A good way to define it is like, okay, a smaller brand starting out, they don't have the money to go to an agency, but they need assets. Most common term we hear now is they need content, depending on what that's going to be. So you're working directly with the people who are either created this product, or that's a good starting point, but then it gets bigger than that, because then bigger brands still don't have the budgets to do every single shoot through an agency. So most of the time they'll hire an agency to do their big campaigns, their big quarterly, whatever it may be, tentpole things. And then they still need stuff in between all of that. So if they don't have an internal photographer, creative crew, then they still have to freelance that out, is the best way I describe it. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think if you're working directly with a brand, depending on the size of the brand, sometimes they will have an internal agency. And that internal agency, even if you're getting the work from them, it's not what I would consider agency work, right? A marketing or advertising agency is typically going to be working on an actual campaign for whatever the brand is doing. Sometimes they'll work on other things that I've seen. I personally have worked in a lot of internal agencies. The agency, I would say, the place that you and I both worked at Turner Broadcasting and starting our careers was an internal agency in a lot of ways, and they worked with other parts of the organization that kind of would make that up. And then most recently, working in Marcom at a tech company, was basically an internal agency, right? They didn't outsource much for the type of work that I was doing, but then that company also would outsource and work with really large name agencies for other things. So it can kind of get a little confusing sometimes in the mix, especially when you're getting to really large companies with huge budgets. I think when you're dealing with smaller brands, they're going to tend to handle most of the work in-house unless they're maybe pitching some new big campaign or product or something they're working on. They might hire an agency to do that. So weirdly, even if you have a great relationship with a brand and you're one of their go-to people for certain things, you may not get the agency work or vice versa. What are the biggest key things that you've found just in terms of working directly with a brand versus actually being hired on to do agency work?
I tend to notice working with a brand directly is you can get a little more involved in the creative process, where sometimes when you get to the agency level, they have such a baked out idea of what this campaign is going to be. And they should, because it's a lot more moving parts. Sometimes it's a big commercial and the photographer is coming along and also shooting assets at the same time, because it's the most cost effective way to do it, to have talent or whatever it may be all together. But you're going into that sometimes later in the process of what the creative's going to be is when they bring you in. So there's a little bit less of that, which is fine. You're there to deliver what they're looking for. Where with the working directly with a brand, there can be opportunities for you to do what you want to do a little bit on top of what they're asking for. And you might have a little more time or whatever it is to help in that process and pitch your ideas. That's really that's how I see it more than I don't.
Yeah. And have you seen that the role of producers, art directors, creative directors, whoever's hiring the photographer typically to come in, does that differ a little bit from brands and agencies, or have you found that it's kind of the same roles hiring and in both?
Yeah, I think it can be a little bit different, who your point of contact might be. I think this is where will always continue to talk about relationships are so important, because if you have a creative director that you have worked with in the past, if you have a producer you've worked with in the past, whatever it may be, they may, if they like working with you, they like your work, they know you're going to deliver, whoever it is you're talking to, they will be the one that can pitch you a little bit in their internal conversations, be it at an agency or a brand. And so I think at an agency, you tend to be talking to a producer who is then connecting you with the creative director, art director. And then for a brand, it tends to be the creative director for the brand that is actually the one that you're talking directly to.
Yeah. Yeah. In my experience, I've found that producers typically can almost act as gatekeepers in a little bit, but they're not always the person that's necessarily making the decision. Sometimes it's a little bit of like a groupthink decision on who they want to bring in to do certain types of work, and a lot of times I think creative directors get a little bit I don't know. I don't want to say that they have more creative control over who they're hiring on, but I do think that their opinions can be valued a little bit more once they're kind of at that creative director level.
But at the same time, if, okay, let's just say that there is a big brand that has hired a big agency to do a shoot for them. If the brand has a person that they like working with, ultimately they're the client that the agency is working. So they can sway that. We've seen this so many times with big celebrities on TV shows. They have a photographer that they are friends with, have worked with for a long time. That person will get hired to shoot the big key art for the show, even though they may not be the best option. They maybe want, somebody may want something else, but because of the relationship, they could get the job, and that's fine. They've worked hard at getting that relationship.
Yeah.
So, but I also do think a producer, where you say could be a gatekeeper, can also be a huge like cheerleader for you. And when they're coming in the conversation, be like, hey, this person delivers. I worked with them on set. They know how to get it done. That can help you, where you say the group think, that person can also be fighting for you a little bit.
Yeah. And how do you see budgets a little bit and how they differ from brands and agencies, just in terms of the amount of money they're able to pay?
Agencies are always going to have a bigger budget, I would say 90% of the time, because they're typically working on a bigger national campaign, or at least a more of an outward facing thing, as opposed to a lot of times when you get hired directly for a brand, they might just be doing, oh, we need more social posts, we need more web presence, we need more of that type of thing, as opposed to a bigger shoot with more production value and everything else behind it.
Yeah. I think just the nature of the larger visibility in the shoot and where the images are going to be seen is going to dictate a lot of times how much budget is being given to that. So, and some brands, just depending on how big or small they are, some brands just don't have a huge marketing budget, or depending on what the images are for, um, they're just not going to have as much money probably to throw at it. But not always, right? There's probably going to be some brands who can pay very well, and you're doing internal agency type work for that brand, and they're still going to pay well.
Or you can go directly for a brand. I have friends that they've set up on a retainer model, and they reach out to brands and they say, we will deliver you X number of images, a couple videos, and whatever every month. You send us whatever product you wanted to show off. You give us this much money, we will do this much. So there's more of an opportunity that you could do that and set up a retainer that's always going, as opposed to an agency that you're not going to do that. You could be, one thing I will say about an agency, once you get in good with the people that work there, agencies work with a bunch of different brands. They're never just working for one client. So you may be there for one shoot. While you're on set, you're talking to the creative director, you're chatting. Oh, well, we have this other shoot. Would you be interested in doing that for a totally different brand, totally different thing? So you have the ability to do that at an agency, where a brand is kind of like you're with this one brand and you're doing that one particular thing.
Yeah. Retainer models are pretty common in the post-production world. There are a lot of brands that will hire like a post-production staff, sometimes even from an agency, and put them on retainer long term. So that is something that happens, but an agency is not going to necessarily hire people under retainer. They're either going to have employees or not, or hire people freelance.
Yeah, they have their go-to freelance list, and that's a great spot to be in at any agency, is you're the go-to person. Because also what people don't realize is there are so many agencies that really do specific things. I've worked with agencies that only do big production, massive shoots. I've worked with agencies that only provide social content and work directly with influencers. They bring the influencers in, they do separate shoots for that. I've worked with ones that only do experiential stuff. They build out expo hall things at convention centers. I drove the Rick and Morty mobile across the country. That's an agency that built out that truck, hired all the people. They were hired by Adult Swim. I was brought in as the photographer, videographer to go on this journey with the Rick and Morty mobile across the country. So it's like you can find these different agencies that do very specific things to maybe find what it is that you like to do. There's way more agencies out in the world than you would ever imagine. Sometimes they're really small, sometimes they're massive. So you can search those out and really find a niche that you're hoping to find.
Yeah, I mean, for every one of the Ogilvies and the Chiates that are out there, there's probably 1,000 smaller agencies. 100%. So, how do you find timelines and approval processes? Like, how do those differ between a brand job and an agency job? Do you find that brands move a little quicker and the agencies move a little slower? That's kind of been my experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like you see, because I think a agency tends to have, it's a bigger group, bigger decision making. Everything has to get proved by a whole other level of people, because there's the agency, their whole team approving it. Then it goes to the brand that also has to approve it. And they have to meet in the middle. Where sometimes if you're working directly with a brand, you can say, hey, they're like, hey, we need this product or this type of shot. We need it by this time, and you just go do it. There can definitely be some back and forth on that of timing and making sure it looks right, and everything should be, like you said, everything should be decided ahead of time of what it's going to be, but it's like it can be a little more straightforward.
Yeah. And also agencies tending to do more campaign work. They have longer timelines, right? The projects and the way the projects are structured. They may be shooting something in the spring that's for the winter, whereas a brand may be shooting something that they need as quickly as possible turned around. And so shorter timelines are just going to kind of crunch things.
Oh, I have a box getting delivered by UPS today for a brand that it's like, oh, we need these. It's a golf bag. We need this golf bag shot really quick because the new color came in. I'm like, all right, I can just do that really quick and get it done. Because also you have to think about with agencies, they've been planning all this stuff. They have to go through the whole creative process of what they want to be and the discovery process of everything leading up to it. So it can be months for an actual shoot to come together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty typical. So you've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think is the best way? Let's say you get a one-off job, whether it's for a brand or an agency. What's the best way that you tend to take that one-off job and turn it into a relationship, hoping for more work?
I think it's so important to be professional and over deliver at a certain point. Like once you have this job, be personable, be a nice person. If you're on set there's so much time where you're on set just hanging out with people. Just have nice conversations and talk to them and give ideas. And like But if you can push it a little bit, like if they're thinking of one thing, but you have ideas of like, well, if we get this also while it's going on, and I mean, I've done that. We worked on a shoot together recently where it's like, oh, they had this idea. I was like, cool. What if I do this little side portrait also, and then that way it'll look better on the back end? And they loved it, and now that's what the shoot ended up being. You retouched it for me. And then just talking about everything else and then following up with those people after the shoot, sending an email saying, hey, thank you. I had a great time. After you, even after you deliver everything and you're all done, another thank you email, just reaching out to those people and talking to them, because these are, once you hang out on set with someone long enough, you become friends with people really quick, unless you're just like sitting over in the corner like an angry grip. It's like, continue that. Do that. If you have some new work, hey, I just shot this. I thought you would like it. Show it to them. Send them a separate email with all of that. Redo your website, whatever it is. All that stuff is just a constant thing, but without just doing it. If you do it naturally and you're just always having conversations with them, it doesn't turn into this like you're only reaching out to them for work.
Right. The just following up thing, right? Like if you're just constantly checking in or following up, it's very different than if you're actually having a conversation with somebody and building a relationship.
Yeah.
If you have something to show or something to talk about, I think that goes a lot further.
Yeah. Or like when I like, if I see something out in the world that we worked on together, text them like, hey, look what I saw. It looks great. Little things like that make such a difference. It's just being a good human being is what it really comes down to. But sometimes when you're working, you don't think about that.
Yeah. So do you find any advantages between working with a brand long term? Because if you have a relationship with a brand, you'll likely be with them long term, or working kind of bouncing for different agency jobs. I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that the right mix of clients should be a mix between brands and agencies, or would you prefer to have more brands with long-term relationships, or maybe just more agency work?
I think it's good to have a mix. Um, I, I, th- I see what's nice about working with a brand specific, especially if it's a smaller brand. You can flex your creativity a little bit more. If you have an idea for something, you can do that. There may not be as much money in it in working with a brand. I do think that's very true. Working with an agency is going to be a little more, everything's going to be a little more thought out and a little more professional as far as like the production side of it goes. You're going to have a few more meetings, which is good because then you're really laying everything out. But also, brands that work with agencies don't always stay with that agency. So you may be working on something with this agency and then that client isn't there anymore. So then hopefully you can find something else at that agency to work on. If not, you're just kind of jumping around to different ones and just making sure to keep up these multiple relationships with different people. Where with a brand, you're just like, unless they have a big change of who's running the marketing department or whoever it is you're working with at that brand, you're pretty much like in that world.
So what advice would you give to somebody who doesn't work with agencies at all and typically just does brand work, how to kind of break in a little bit to the agency world?
I think start locally, wherever you are, look up all of these agencies. Look, you can find, if you just Google, you can find all sorts of agencies around you, and on their website, they're going to show you what they do. That's what they do. They're trying to show their case studies of their favorite things that they work on. If something interests you, you can find a contact there. Go on LinkedIn, find out who their creative director is, and don't just follow them and not say anything. Like, put some effort into it. You have to like have a little bit of a conversation with them. Be like, hey, I saw this piece. I saw this thing you guys worked on. I really thought it was cool. Whatever. I work in the area. Just like put it out there. You're not going to get a response sometimes. But if you continue putting it out there having more conversations, eventually it'll come up, or they will think of you. Hopefully, is the way
Hopefully.
I would look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add? I think we've kind of covered the basics here at least.
I mean, on your end, for like retouching for a brand, do you feel like it's a little looser on what they want, or it's like it's always going to be kind of specific? I feel like once it gets to the retouching end, it's like, no, this is what we want.
Yeah, it depends on the brand. So most of the brands I've worked with in the last, let's say, 10 years are really large companies, right? And so take a Lululemon, for instance, they have really clear brand guidelines in terms of what they want. And this goes from everything from like editorial to like advertising marketing pieces and even down to their e-com. It's super specific in terms of what their expectations are. And those are outlined by creative directors. There's conversations between groups of creative directors and art directors to determine exactly what those brand guidelines are. And so it extends to photography, but in terms of the retouching, it gets very, very specific, right? And I think that most brands that I've seen, regardless of whether or not they're hiring an agency to do some of the work or the brand is directly dictating that work, they have a really clear idea in mind of what they want, and they're pretty vocal when they see what they don't want, and that's a good thing because they are protecting kind of their own branding there. Um, but I've kind of found that in general, on my end, uh, I I don't see a huge difference on the post production in terms of working on a brand job versus an agency job in terms of what they want for post, in terms of specific call outs. It's just more that on the agency side, you will have additional work that goes into knowing there's kind of a round of revisions from the agency before they show it to the client. And then the brand will usually have a round of revisions after that as well. So I think in general, I've never really worked on a project where there's an argument between the brand and the agency, and I think that's simply because the brand is the client of the agency, right? Like whoever's hiring the agency to do something, they're going to get final say on how the images look. I do know that occasionally an agency will create something for the brand, and the brand is unhappy, and then there's some kind of back and forth on making sure that things are fixed. Um, I've definitely been brought into some of those situations quite often where an agency has done something for a brand. The brand is not happy with what was done, and so they need somebody to come in and fix those things on the back end. I would say that a lot of new relationships that I've built sometimes come from those. We need somebody to put out the fire, who knows what they're doing, and then I build a lot of relationships from there as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of times where someone on staff is like, "Oh yeah, I can do that retouching," and it's like if you're not really fully like been doing it for as long as you have in years and years, it's like there's some little things that people think they can fix, but like unless you really know what you're doing, it's going to look so bad.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of bad retouching out there. And I would say the higher level campaign work and really high level stuff nowadays, it's pretty flawless. It's pretty great, like because they're able to throw money at it. But I've definitely seen, especially for smaller brands, like a lot of really bad work out there. And that doesn't always look good for the photographer who shoots it if they want to use it to promote themselves as well.
Now, do you see where agencies maybe have more deliverables on the retouching of like different crops and things like that can be used? Because then it gets, I just think that sometimes they are looking at it for 30 different uses as opposed to if a brand is like, oh, it's going to be on the website and it's going to be on Instagram or whatever, they keep it a
Yeah.
little bit less.
That depends. I've actually seen some brands with a lot of different usage cases. Like some brands will have, let's say it's a, I don't know, like an image that they're using for marketing purposes, but it's for like online marketing purposes. And that single image will have multiple variations based off of different usage cases, right? Like if they know it's going to go for email, social, and something else, there might be a whole bunch of different crops to like fit all those different things. Yeah, in agency work, typically it depends on whatever the use case is for it, but I have seen kind of the similarities. I don't think necessarily one over the other. There are people who uh, will just go with one full regular image, whatever that is. Think of it if you think like full res terms. Um, and then a designer is going to be the person who's kind of a little bit responsible for taking that and actually doing some of the cropping. And then I've seen other things on the opposite side where I'm delivering 8 deliverables for the same image.
Yeah.
So it's kind of runs a mix.
Go work
Right.
for an agency. That's what I'm just going to tell you.
Yeah, agencies.
But if you're starting out, find a brand, find someone you like. If you think you can do so, if it fits your style, you work with someone, you'll be passionate about it. Great. Find that and go after them. It doesn't hurt to try. Maybe just shoot something as a spec piece and be like, oh, I went ahead and shot this. I thought you would like it. It's a great way to start a conversation if you have the free time.
Yeah. And I think we'll have an entire episode on shooting spec work, because I do think if you are slow and are trying to break into shooting for brands and agencies, and this goes for post production as well, you need to always be working on your skills. It's a great way to work on your skills, but it's also a really great way to showcase what you can do for a brand, because it's showing, hey, I can do this. Then it looks specifically like the imagery you already use. And I think it's a match in terms of creative content. And I think that's like a great way to try and find new work. And worst case scenario, you don't build a relationship with that brand, but you can use that same spec job to pitch for other clients. And you can also just use it to hone your skills and build more relationships.
Yeah. And trying something totally different, not even totally different, but just trying something different to push yourself in any way whatsoever just helps you grow as a creative.
Yeah. So if you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening now. And we've got more episodes coming your way. We're excited to keep diving into the business of commercial photography with you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.